Welcome back to the Hard Skills Show, where we take a deep dive into the most challenging soft skills required to navigate leadership uncertainty, complexities, and change today and into the future. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu, psychologist, leadership consultant, and founder of TowerScope. So today's episode is really relevant to current experiences and how national events have had an impact in our daily experiences with belonging and non-belonging. How can we increase the experience of belonging for ourselves and others? Dr. Otito is here with us today to help us imagine things differently and learn from her belonging framework. It's a great topic to help us kick off season 7, which is focused on navigating unhealthy work environments, in the honor of my new workbook that came out, Millennials Workbook for Navigating Workplace Politics, and really beyond. So whether you're a leader managing a team or simply trying to support your colleagues, this conversation is for you. Let me introduce our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu. I knew I was going to mess it up. Dang it. Iwuchukwu, which is a beautiful name, by the way. She is an organizational psychologist and she's a pharmacist-scientist. An interesting combo here, career strategist, international speaker, and author, and certified facilitator in cultural intelligence. Dr. Otito has been studying and researching the impact of belonging in cross-cultural experiences since immigrating to the United States 20 years ago today. And I can't imagine a better guest today for today's times. Plus, she and I clearly enjoy having lots of books behind us, and was bobbing her head to my music, so clearly she enjoys music too. So we already have a lot in common, Dr. Otito. Welcome to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brancu. I am so excited to be here.
Yeah,
I remember when I first met you and where I first met you. And so when you asked me to come, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such an honor. So thank you.
absolutely. Yeah. So Dr. Otito and I met at a talk that I was giving for the Society of Psychologists in Leadership. It was about redefining leadership, and especially for women and marginalized voices. And she attended and she really enjoyed it. And then I started seeing her work because that's how we connected. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love her work. I want to talk to her more. So that is how she ended up on this show. So Dr. Otito, you immigrated 20 years ago today. I immigrated probably, should I date myself, 40 something years? But that means that you have a personal experience with that transition into a new world, a new culture. In addition, you have a personal and parent experience with neurodivergence, which adds kind of additional perspective, cultural, perspective and of all of this impacting belonging and non-belonging. So I would love to hear more about how those experiences, the personal experience of immigration, the personal experience of neurodivergence and parenting, a child with neurodiversity. How has that influenced your interest in belonging and non-belonging and kind of where you are with it right now?
Okay, thank you for that question. So it's interesting because, every time I think about that story, about this story I'm about to tell, one of two stories, I can't believe that it happened, but it did. And this was literally when I walked into graduate school. So I came like fresh off the plane and into school. I didn't have time for adjustment. Maybe I had about 3 days.
Wow.
And school. And I remember the first time this professor, right, walked into the classroom and he literally said to us, he said, I don't know why it has to be he, but he said, you're not meant to be here, something like that. This particular field is for certain people and
Wow.
you could trace the ancestral tree. That's what he said. You could literally trace it to me. And so I know that not all of you are going to make the cut, something like that. So that was one of them. Wow. Another one came and said, I think that was the very first week. He said, well, all of you are coming from all of these countries where you thought like you were the local champions, but now you're here in this country and you're gonna have to almost like prove yourself, right? He's like, you're here now and you're going to be small fish in a big pond. Literally, he said that in class.
Mhm, mhm.
And I remember thinking, what? That's kind of, and I said, I was born in Nigeria. And I remember thinking to myself, you do not know who we are, right? That kind of thing. And I remember that I doubled down on the work. I worked so hard. I mean, obviously, looking back now, that was not a good strategy because it led to burnout. But I said, it was trying to prove myself. I said, I'm going to show you that I'm here. I deserve to be here. And it was hard though. But I remember that feeling in the classroom and thinking, you only just met us. Like, why are you saying this, to us? And I think I've carried that in my heart, even as I, entered the education space to say, I never want anyone in my classroom to feel like, they don't belong because that's literally what it was. So that was from like literally my first 2 weeks in graduate school. And I just never forgot how that felt, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, many years later, I have my own child, he's in the school and he was in kindergarten at the time. And I remember getting a call that, that they had some observations and they wanted to let me know. So I said, okay, this was the school psychologist. I said, okay. So I went in and I was literally blindsided. There was a whole child study team. And, the teacher at the time was saying how he doesn't pay attention, he's very like disruptive and all of that. And I said, what's the issue? She said, oh, his comprehension is not good. Like, I keep trying to get him to read. And I said, how are you measuring comprehension? And she said, well, they read and we ask them questions and he doesn't answer me. And so that's how I know, like he's not understanding the thing. And I said, this is my child, right? And she said, but he reads really well. That's what she said. She said, he reads really well. He reads at the fourth grade level. And I said, I didn't even know that. But I said, it's my child. And I can tell you how I kind of, you know, assess his comprehension at home because he does the same thing. He will not answer me if I ask him like this direct question of what was in the book. And so I said, I started to like misread the book. Like I'll just say, oh, in this book, I'll say, maybe Leo went to the farm and he'll say, no, 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 mom, on page 25, he says Leo went to, the grocery store. And I said, if that is not comprehension, I don't know what it is, right? Like, I don't understand why you're
Mm.
saying that he's not comprehending. And then she said, well, he's not letting me focus on the other kids because he came in knowing how to read already. So I don't have time to focus on the kids who are just getting their ABCs. And I remember thinking, so my child has to suffer, right, for, this whole uneven class, so to speak. I said, so what is the criteria? What are we going to use to help him in the classroom, being that, his social and emotional skills are not yet there. This is why he's in kindergarten. They asked me if he could move a level, and I said no, because I want him to kind of, have the social skills. So all of this was so baffling to me because I said, you haven't even taken the time to know this child. You already kind of, judge them, and it's like they're a problem. Right. And that's to me becomes the central conversations around belonging, right? Because of these judgments, summary judgments that are made sometimes, and then people just almost cannot overcome that, right? In the eyes of the people making the judgments. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a lot of really, great stories about messaging that you got and messaging that your child got about belonging, and not always based in your capabilities, right? So belonging does not necessarily mean that it's connected to capabilities. So as you sort of continue to look into this experience of belonging and non-belonging, what have you learned over time for yourself about that experience, and even how you've applied it to your son, how you've applied it to other people that you work with?
Yeah. I think the primary thing that always come from is who defines the space, who defines who gets to be in the space. And so you find yourself taking the voice of advocacy to say everyone, deserves a shot. They deserve to be in this space. You may not like it, you may not like them, but the space itself, you cannot stop them from being in that space if they
Mm.
choose to, right? So then it comes down to a matter of choice because, with this child, we've also thought, should we homeschool, should we not? So that's the choice we are making. But while he's there or while I'm in a certain place, then I should be able to be afforded, right, all the rights and privileges that come with being in the space, if we're looking at it from a systemic point of view. But I've seen that that doesn't always happen. And so for the individual, then you have to almost like reorient yourself and say, okay, with what self am I going to come into this space, right? Because I know people
Mhm.
talk about, the authentic self. And while I appreciate that messaging, sometimes I feel like that may not be the best thing for certain people, right? Because you then have to almost like look at the space, try to see if you can redraw your boundary lines and know, right, how you should be in that space, right? People in the, neurodiversity community or neurodivergent community say it's masking. But that's what you have to do sometimes in order to be able to, walk through that space and then come back, to a safer space, which is typically your home, and be yourself, right? In that sense. So yeah, that's the way I see it to say, you have to advocate while you're in the space, but at the same time, you should also know that this space may not be able to take, right, the fullness of myself in terms of capacity and all of that. And so I need to be mindful of that and mindful then of how I present myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there is the context of, on the one hand, you were admitted to the program. They've invited you into the space. On the other hand, they're sending you all kinds of messages that you don't belong. And so you're trying to think, am I allowed to actually be myself here or not? Or who did you actually admit to this program? Right? Now let's blow it up even larger, right? At
Uh-huh.
a national and
Mhm.
international level, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, national, international crises have a way of somehow creating this interesting paradox of, on the one hand, creating less belonging. It's us versus them. That is a threat response, right? Who are my people that I can feel safe with, and who are not my people that I cannot feel safe with? What is my, and it's total self-protection.
Mhm.
Um, at the same exact time, it also creates spaces of increasing belonging when people are under threat and looking for safe places and spaces and people, right? How do you think about navigating those polarities and even like thinking in the workplace, right? In the workplace, some people are talking about us versus them. Some of our own people, my people, are talking about we this and they that. And it creates both safety and lack of safety, belonging and lack of belonging at the same time. How do you make sense of that?
So what I think about what's going on at the national level, I think about it from a family systems perspective, right? It's that sense of um, like you said, is a threat response. It's a sense of, oh, everything I own now is going to have to be shared, right? In that sense. And we see it, and I use family system because you see it in a family. If the addition of, a new child, whether by birth or by adoption, right? The children that are currently in the house or the child that is currently in the home has this you know, almost like a natural sense of something is changing, right? Something has shifted, something is never going to be the same. And so their response, right, to that, it's sometimes you can't predict it. And I think that's what we're seeing at the national level. And so everyone then, in order to respond to that, I would say evoked responses, we now cluster into our own, identity spaces. And so, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, then it becomes us versus them. But I think if we came out of that zero sum, mentality to say, if I get a slice of the pie, another person doesn't get it, then it helps us all to see that we're all here for, a common good. And what is that common good? The survival of the human species, I
Mhm.
would say, or at work, the concept of all of us working together to meet organizational goals. Now, how you may meet that goal or your own process may be a little different from mine, but it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that you're wrong or I'm wrong, right? In that sense, it's just what I call the different ways that we see the world. And so what happens then now is someone says, if you cannot see through my own view, through my own window, then you're not allowed in this space. But it's like, but there are many windows in the house. I can go look through another window as long as we want to, look outside and admire the weather. Actually, if we do that, it actually allows us to compare, to say, oh, I see this and I see this, and, what a beautiful environment we live in, right? So all of these are just analogies, but that's the sense that I see, to say there's no reason that we have to almost like be this way, right? If not for that, like human response to threats, right? Because it's an unknown. You don't know what's going to come behind. And so it's like, let me stop this from even happening. But the ways in which we're stopping it are antithetical to human flourishing, right? That's
Yeah.
the way I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't believe it, but we're already reaching an ad break. So before we continue on this very interesting conversation, we're going to enter into an ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu, an author of The Belonging Paradox. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You could find us at lots of locations at talkradio.nyc. We'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu. And she is the author of The Belonging Paradox. So we've been talking about this paradox from my perspective about belonging and non-belonging during crises, during international and national crises. And you started, talking about not falling into the trap of clustering into various identity spaces, which I loved. I wrote it down how you wrote that. And that our first identity is the human species. That is what we all have in common. That's our first identity. You also shared around kind of like the recognition of we are all windows into our experiences and our environment. And those windows are important, not to just like look out your own window, but to recognize there's multiple windows in our home, in our space, and that you might want to take in a different perspective, a different part of your environment to get, a bigger view of it. So I'm wondering how how all of this connects to how you think about belonging, and especially kind of how you came up with the belonging paradox as a focus of your book.
Okay. So again, speaking from that view, I would say my worldview of neurodiversity. The paradox for me, actually two paradoxes that I explored in the book, is this idea of, belonging being almost like an internal state and then an external process. So I have to be able to know who I am, right? Accept myself for who I am. And then when I enter into a space, then I work on, making sure that I feel, right? I have that feeling of belonging in that space. And sometimes that would necessitate some work. It's going to necessitate work of making sure that I too am also sending signals of belonging to other people, regardless of, who or what I am. And the second paradox was, it's tied to this first one of that we can be, ourselves within a community and outside of the community. Because I do think that the work of belonging, you can't speak about it without talking about the tension behind wanting to be yourself and wanting to be an integral part of a group. Right now, the problem with a group is there might be certain characteristics in that group that may not align with your, and by alignment, I don't mean even values, but it's just the way the group may not align to your own person. And so how do you walk through that? Because you want to be a part of the group. As an example, talk about school, right? Children want to go to school, or I want to go to work. However, the particular work environment may not be aligned to my personhood, my personality, and all of that. And so how do I straddle that tension, knowing that all I want to do is work, right? Regardless of how I come across. And so those were the things that I kind of kept researching and wondering about, because if you think in terms of, maybe social rejection or things, I don't think people come into a space thinking that they're going to be rejected. They come just as they are, but then, they kind of get signals from the environment or from friends. When I talk about environment, I'm talking about social environment, which could mean groups. They get the signals that tell them you don't really belong here, right? And so what that does is the person could go to another space, but then that experience may follow them, and then they're kind of a little bit worry now, right, in the new space. And the worriness then comes across as being aloof, right? And so you then get this almost like feedback mechanism where it's like this new person is so aloof, but not recognizing that all they're doing is just being a little bit guarded because of their previous experiences. And so how do people recognize that they are responding to this person who is also responding to them? So it's, again, like I said, it's like a feedback loop. And so for me, it's the question of how do we walk through all of this, right? Both from the individual point of view and from the organizational point of view, knowing though that organizations are made up of individuals, right? So it's how do you straddle that continuous tension?
Yeah. A couple of things come up for me when you're sort of sharing this. One is just a personal story of to describe kind of like the experience here, right? Which is, I am a mom of a daughter who's interested in volleyball. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't identify as a volleyball mom, right? However, when I go to these tournaments, there are volleyball moms. And they all crowd around together and they're all talking volleyball, and I'm totally clueless about volleyball. And I also look very different and have, different experiences and, background than they. It's very clear. They know it. I know it. We haven't talked about it, right? But what happened last year is there was a situation where my daughter needed, some support. And I realized I never made any relationships because I always felt like I was the outsider. Uh-huh. I always felt like, not just, I didn't just feel like maybe I might be rejected, but I rejected them too. I didn't make any effort to try to cultivate relationships. I just accepted the state of things. And so when it came to me needing help for my daughter, I had realized I failed her in failing to make a connection that I clearly could have made an effort to do. And I think all of that speaks to this idea of that you don't hear a lot of when we talk about belonging, is that there's a part of us that we're supposed to also seek creating a space of belonging, even when we don't necessarily feel it first. Like that is our responsibility too, right? So sending signals of belonging, one of the things that I learned at the very tail end is, yeah, I should invite everybody to dinner after a tournament. That will signal some level of belonging. And lo and behold, people came, and lo and behold, we kind of got along, and it was nice. Shocking, I know, but I had to create that. Like I had to also step in to deep discomfort, my personal discomfort, in order to create that sense of belonging, in order to feel that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's really what my book explores, right? That personal responsibility versus collective responsibility, because it goes both ways, right? Especially if you are now aware of your person, right? Like you said, you were aware of, I'm not a part of this people, but I'm in this space, and my daughter deserves, like I said, the rights and privileges of volleyball. And so I must not deprive her of that because of my own discomfort. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So going back to the tension now of wanting to be yourself and then wanting to be part of a group, right? What I have found more often now than I feel like maybe even in the past is the moment we think that someone feels differently than us about anything, we're shocked, we're disappointed, and now all of a sudden we don't have a sense of belonging. And that's not really what belonging is about. Like we're all different. You don't have to agree with every single thing, every thought I have, in order for us to feel belonging. So I'm curious if there's anything in your belonging framework around trying to sort of navigate that tension of we can experience differences and still belong.
Yes. So it's the orientation part, right? So if you think about belong, I call the O orientation, world orientation, or location orientation. And that really speaks to cultural intelligence, right? And that is the idea that people are different, right? As I'm orienting myself in relation to the world around me. And orientation literally requires me to know where I am, right? And where I am is going to be completely different from where I was before, because that's where I'm trying to belong in this new space. If it was a place where I was comfortable, I kind of know everybody. I don't need this. So every time we enter into, new space, new work experiences and all of that, part of the orientation that we must do, I think, or I state in the book, is that we need to get to know the people around us. So just like you were saying with the volleyball, we need to get to know the customs, the practices, all of those things, can help us situate ourselves. Because the quicker we get to know those things, the quicker we can know if this is a space that we really want to be in, right? Because we do have, choices in terms of, sometimes the choices are forced, but we do have a choice. And so for me, it's that the orientation aspect of it, to say, how do I situate myself in this new space or place that has people who are different from me? Now, not everybody's going to take up this challenge or this, responsibility and do things. And so we need to be aware of that as well. Like you're saying, some people feel like, cultural intelligence is for those people. I don't need it. But I always say that everyone comes into a space, especially in the workspace, with different cultures, even if we're all from the same part of the world, because the culture could be the family you're raised in, the school you went to, the town you live in. All of those things kind of coalesce together, right? And people carry those things along with them, consciously or unconsciously. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of a couple of things that tie into navigating workplace politics and also team dynamics and team development. With workplace politics, one of the things that is in my book is around doing an environmental scan. Anytime you're in a new setting, and you're trying to understand how to create change or how can I speak up in this situation. The first thing is understanding your context, and an environmental scan is asking all kinds of questions to understand what was the history and who has power here and who makes decisions and how are decisions made and all of these things, right?
Yeah.
So that is very similar to cultural orientation that you talk about with belonging. Absolutely. The other is that when we do team development, it is one of the most important things before you even get into anything is like, can we create a sense of human connection here? And a lot of team development sessions include something around connecting as humans and storytelling, right? If we tell stories about how we were raised, how we were brought up, our childhoods, you're going to hear different stories, but you are going to hear some similarities about values, about things that are important to you, about, surprises, about, I was raised in kind of a similar experience, even though it was a totally different town. And all of that creates a sense of belonging, even when you're totally different in terms of cultural background, upbringing, town, school, family. We can have very different experiences and similar threads, that connect us. So when we come back, we're reaching another ad break. When we come back, let's dive even more deeply into what else, in addition to this orientation piece, can we do to help bring about more of a sense of belonging. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu. We are talking about your upcoming book, The Belonging Paradox, and you started sharing one part of the acronym, orientation. I would love to hear the rest of the acronym of BELONG. What goes into it from your perspective?
Okay. I'm smiling so hard or so big because while you were speaking, I was laughing. I said, maybe it's us, as organizational psychologists, because really a lot of the practices or some of the practices I put in the book stem around storytelling. Storytelling, I call them, telling your belonging stories. And that's exactly what you described. And so it's that ability to make meaning. And, as different as we are, we're able to make meaning or construct meaning from one another's stories. So the framework that I developed and I talk about in the book, it's really, I think about it as a wayfarer's tool, right? So the navigation tools for lived belonging in whatever space you find yourself. And, it's called the Belong Framework. And the B really talks about boundaries. And, when people talk about boundaries, they say, oh, but it's this idea of knowing, where to go or where not to go. Because in certain instances, there are places where I don't need to go, right? So it wouldn't matter if those spaces accepted me or not, because I don't have any need, right? I don't see any need that they can satisfy for me. Now, not to say that, those spaces are bad at all, but it's this idea of knowing exactly where you should be, right? If somebody has said, so I use an example in the book of, the adult only resorts, right? If I have a family, I should not be going there. I should know that that is not a space for me. Right. So there's no sense in saying I'm going to take my children there. And then when I get there, you must, you must accept us. Right. They already told me their conditions for entry. So that knowledge, right, of what you call boundary lines, I think it really helps us all as we make our way in the world. And then the E is for empathy, right? Kind of, being able to walk in people's shoes. And then the L, it comes from this concept of not holding tight, right, to outcomes, right? Like being loose in our outlook to life and to different spaces. I talked about the O already, which is that orientation, and then the N is like needed, right? And that's why I said when we enter into spaces, we need to know that there's a need, for us in those spaces, right? Like you said, the school that gave me if I go back to my graduate school experience, the school that gave me the admission, there was a need, right? Why they asked me to come in there. They needed students. And so, I need to know that my presence there was not arbitrary, right? Like you said, you invited me into this space, and that means that I'm here to fulfill a need, right, within this space. And then the G, right, it's not something that you may find in a lot of organizational, psychology kind of things, but it talks about grace, the concept of, being graceful or grace-filled, to know that, everyone is walking a journey. And so we have to give grace, right? Where mistakes happen, and they will happen, right? Where belonging gets impinged or impacted, we need to be able to look at it, right, from that perspective of perhaps there's something here I don't understand. It's not always about the way that I'm looking at it. I need to make room for other interpretations.
Wow, I love this so much. There's a bunch of things that you talk about that I don't hear very much when people talk about belonging. And some of what you shared around boundaries, not holding tight, being loose, and I want to hear more about that in just a second. Knowing that you're needed in a certain space and where your presence is needed. And maybe also around the grace as well. There's something about, I think the way that we've interpreted belonging is I should be able to belong in all spaces. And that means we're in for a whole lot of disappointment and a whole lot of shock when we end up in a space where it doesn't make any sense because of the grouping or the requirements, as you said, the entry, and it makes me think a lot about because I've been growing my own leadership development community membership program. I think a lot about community. I think a lot about how to create safe spaces. I've been in a lot of communities that have not been safe, have really disappointed me. And I was actually terrified to create my own space because of those bad experiences. You too. Okay, right. So, but what I've noticed about the application of, for example, group coaching to a community space is group coaching always has ground rules. Group coaching always has who's in and who's out. What is within the scope of this? What is not in the scope of this? Why would you opt in? Why would you opt out of this kind of program? community spaces is the same, right? You need to know what you're getting yourself into, who is the community for and not for, whether it will speak to you. All of these things need to be explicit, and it's rarely explicitly stated. Now, yes, there are some spaces that are unfairly discriminatory and biased and don't say it, and then other places that are unfairly discriminatory and biased and do say it. And those are problems kind of outside, I think, the scope of what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So tell me more about like how you distinguish between spaces that are more on this discriminatory side versus spaces that are trying to be helpfully clear about the boundaries, about, you know, what's needed of you in what way, and those kinds of things.
So there's an example I use in the book, and no offense to, you know, the Harley Davidson riders, right? But that's a space I said to myself, I'm not a motorcycle person. I already know this, right? So there's nothing I'm going to go look for in that community. Meanwhile, this is a tightly knit community. They know each other. They have like certain symbols, I would say, right? The jackets, the whatever else they used to kind of identify themselves outside of owning those gleaming, you know, machines that I really admire. But, you know, I know I'm never going to get on one. So in that space, they may not necessarily say to you, this is what is needed to require, that this is what is needed to belong, or this is it. But you can see it, right? So it's almost like unspoken, but it's overt. It's not covert at all. They're not trying to, you know, hide their spaces. But then you think about spaces like, you know, third spaces, community spaces, the park, and all of that. Everyone should be able to use those spaces. So when I see a person telling me, oh, you cannot do this because of this, my first instance is to ask, who are you to say that to me, right? That's kind of my instinct, because I feel like this space here is open space, right? So I used again the example of, you know, the luxury or all adult only resorts. Those tell you very clearly what is required for entry. So it would be ludicrous of another person to say, hey, you know, yes, I'm here with my child and you must allow me entry because it's a resort. And so the question, I think, then, or the dissonance for many people is when you enter into those spaces that are literally said to be for all, right? I come again back to school, right? A school, a public school, will tell you about, you know, making sure that every child is educated. But then within each classroom, based on the teacher, based on, you know, I would say the biases that we all bring with us, every child has almost like a very different experience within the same school. And so it's those kinds of spaces, I feel like that's where my, you know, my whatever it is gets agitated to say, but you said the contract here is that every child here should get a good education. Now, what I consider good versus another family may be different, but at least the basic minimum should be met, and no child should have to be, you know, discriminated against, I would say, in this space, whether overtly or covertly. So those are the kinds of things to say for us. What do we expect of the spaces, right? Another space for many people would be maybe, you know, faith communities, right? You come into the spaces, they literally would say, you belong here, right? That's kind of the messaging that we give to our students and all that. But then when they come in, like happened to me in graduate school, their belonging experiences are so different, right? Based on who is in the room, who is not in the room, based on so many things. And then I think the part that then adds a bit of insult to injury is that no one believes you sometimes when you're telling the stories, or they just like minimize the story. And so from that point of minimization, like I said, you carry around some wounds that are not visible, but then you take it into spaces and it's like, you show up a certain way and people wonder what happened, right? Most times it's because of, you know, the previous belonging experiences. But then I think part of the work that we need to do is to be able to shed those things off and know that every space we enter is its own space, right? You don't bring in, as best as you can, you know, the clutter from past experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that what you mean by not holding tight, the loose part?
Yeah. That's exactly what I mean.
Got it. Yeah. Which is not easy. We hold on
Now,
to a lot as
it is
humans.
not easy. It is not easy. And I, and that's why I said it's a lived, like it's not something you learn and then that's it. Every space is going to, present itself differently. And so you have to be ready. Like I talk about this concept of evocation, and I talk about it a lot because, as women, Black women, many times people would stereotype or say certain things about, the culture or whatever. But then I got to realize that there are certain spaces you enter, even if you do nothing at all, you don't do anything at all, you just come in. It's almost like you entering into that space already changes the atmosphere for the people because they're not used to seeing a person like you, right? And I work in healthcare and in education. So these are two primary areas where this is, to me, has been a thing. It's almost like they're just not used to it. And it has nothing to do with you. It's just the people in the environment are like reacting to say, who is this person, right? What is this new person? And so then they start to, again, send out signals to you that you then react to, right? And all of this is being done on a subliminal level. And so that's what I always say, let's bring it out into the open, right? I schooled a little bit in the South, and I said, there are certain places that I would rather be in terms of just environmental signals, right? Because if a person doesn't like you and they show it, that's back to the boundaries. Then I know I don't need to, try to be friends with this person because they've shown me that they don't want to be friends. But there are times when, because of the shared space, we will have to be friends, right? Like I remember moving and our next door neighbor, I will not say the city, but came to say hello to us the very first day we landed with a holstered gun on his hip. And I was looking at him like, okay, what are you trying to tell me? But this is our next door neighbor. And so I said, no, but where I grew up, neighbors are like family, right? They're the people that if you left something, if you left your stove on, they'll go turn it off for you. And so, it was kind of what to do. Went back to a shared, norm or artifact of make food for the holidays, I sent some. Make food for whatever occasion, I sent some to him. And we became the best of friends, such that this person cried when we were moving, And so there are instances like that where you do have to bridge the divide. But because the same thing happened with the next door neighbor and he returned the food, didn't want anything to do with us. That's the boundary. I know, okay, this person, I've stretched out my arm and they don't, my right arm of fellowship, they don't want anything to do with me. So I leave them alone. I'm not going to keep trying, to be friends with them and keep getting rebuffed because then it becomes martyrdom. I'll just focus my attention and my energy on the ones that have, made room too, right, for that back and forth. So that's the idea of that boundary. And so that piece sometimes is hard for people to comprehend because most times we internalize it and think it's something about me as a person. And many times it's not. It's just the environment, right? That's almost like sends a signal and then we react to that. And then you see this unspoken dynamics, right? That then comes to fore as you continue to do the work.
Yeah. Those are really, really great examples. We are reaching an ad break, so I will have a few more follow-ups after the ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu, who is the author of the belonging paradox. So we'll be right back in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be Frank About Health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Otito Iwuchukwu. And she is the author of The Belonging Paradox, and she just went through some really juicy, great examples of how you can think about her framework, Belong, and especially around the boundaries, which I found very insightful, as well as kind of the reciprocity necessary to evaluate the boundary setting, what I have to try and test out in order to evaluate boundaries, as well as setting my own boundaries. Now, one of the things I think is very fascinating that you mentioned to me before is that you have found that certain professions, and especially like the helping professions of all professions, seem rife with behaviors that can actually lead to or reinforce a lack of belonging. And I think I have a sense of this myself within our profession of psychology and certain subsections of psychology, but I would love to hear more about what you have seen around this.
It's interesting because one of the ways that you can actually use to expand belonging, right, the consciousness of belonging, is this contact, like positive contact, making sure that people from different, groups and different cultures come together in a cooperative atmosphere. And so with the helping professions, right, many of us go in with this concept of doing good, right? So we want to do good. We want to help people. We want to make sure that the world is a better place. But then you get into these places and it looks like, the people who come in there almost like many times are very driven, right? Driven to achieve that goal that they want to achieve. And so you have, what you call highly ambitious people, very driven. And so you can imagine having a cluster of this kind of people, right? I don't want to use the word type A or anything, but you have this cluster. And so you get into this almost like high levels of competition. So sometimes the goal is even forgotten, all in the bid of who can do the most good, right? And so once you have competition, conscious or unconscious, the belonging levels go down because now people start to exhibit certain behaviors and certain things that then, impact other people around, in spite of the fact that all of you are there for this subordinate goal, right? So I don't know what it is with the professions, but it's like, look, we're all here to be teachers, right? Yes, winning Teacher of the Year is a good goal, but let's not forget that we're here for the students, right? In that sense. So,
yeah, absolutely. And, even clinically, right? If we're talking psychologists or people who go into any helping profession where they're diagnosing, right? What is diagnosis? You either are or are not, or you have this problem, or you don't have this problem, or you have this other problem. It automatically categorizes. And if you take it a step too far, you're going to stigmatize unnecessarily, or put people in buckets where, frankly, the behavior is a spectrum, like it's on a continuum, right? And we find that in all kinds of behaviors and experiences and identities, right? It's actually on a we're all human beings. We just function in different ways and different experiences. So there's a risk there of calling people in and out, right? Now, I wish I could talk with you forever, but I also recognize that we're nearing the end here. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Otito Iwuchukwu. Unique name, like Mira said. So you won't find many of people with my name, and then my website, right? So yes, that's my website, otitoiwuchukwu.com. And if you click on the books, you will learn more about the belonging paradox, how to order, and how to join the community. So yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Audience, what is one thing you took away from your time today with Dr. Otito? Share it with us on LinkedIn and at talkradio.nyc so we could cheer you on, so we could hear more about, so we can support, right? We'd love to hear from you. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, all over the place. So if today's episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague or leave a review. And if you're looking for more personalized support or leadership or team coaching, head to towerscope.com to schedule a consultation. Again, you can also reach out to Dr. Otito, and I'm going to spell it for you so that you can find her website easily. Otito Iwuchukwu, okay, .com. Find her website. It's beautiful. It's got lots and lots of things about the different projects that she's doing, including the belonging paradox in her community. And the stuff I talk about here on this show is also part of my research-based strategic leadership pathway roadmap that I use to help socially conscious organizational misfits on their leadership journeys. To help out and to learn more about us, you can go to towerscope.com. You could also go check out my books, Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, or the workbook. And just want to thank you, talkradio.nyc, for hosting. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Together, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side and learn about belonging from Dr. Otito. This is Dr. Mira Branco signing off. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Otito.
Thank you, Mira.
Bye, everybody.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift,